Tonight, one of the most heavily guarded places on Earth was suddenly at the center of chaos. Gunfire erupted near the White House. Secret Service agents returned fire. A suspect was killed. A bystander was wounded. And for several tense minutes, the political heart of the United States was locked down as journalists, officers, and officials tried to understand whether this was an isolated attack, a security breach, or something even bigger. But this story is bigger than just one shooting. It touches on presidential security, political instability, the atmosphere around Washington, and a disturbing pattern. According to the Associated Press, this was the third incident of gunfire in the vicinity of President Donald Trump in roughly a month. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what happened, what we know about the suspect, what remains unclear, and why this incident matters far beyond the streets outside the White House gates. Let's start with the core facts. On Saturday evening, at around 6 p.m. Eastern Time, a man approached the area near 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue NW, close to the White House complex and the Eisenhower Executive Office building. According to the Secret Service account reported by multiple outlets, the man pulled a weapon from a bag and opened fire near a security checkpoint or security post outside the White House perimeter. Secret Service officers returned fire almost immediately, striking the suspect. He was taken to a hospital, where he later died. That alone would be a major story. But the setting is what transforms it into a national security moment. This wasn't a random street corner or a remote federal office. This was the zone directly outside the White House, one of the most protected pieces of real estate in the world, an area watched by layers of surveillance, heavily armed federal personnel, restricted access points, and overlapping security systems. The fact that shots were fired there at all instantly raises questions about threat detection, perimeter protection, and the broader climate of political violence in the United States. And yes, President Trump was at the White House at the time. Multiple reports said he was inside the building when the gunfire erupted, but officials stressed that he was not impacted by the incident. CBS reported that the president was briefed, while Fox cited White House Communications Director Stephen Chung, saying Trump was still working later that evening. The Secret Service also confirmed he was present but unharmed. That matters, because the immediate fear in any event like this is whether the president himself was in direct danger. Based on the available reporting, officials say he was not. Still, the scene was chaotic. Journalists on the White House grounds reported hearing rapid bursts of gunfire. CBS said its crew heard multiple shots and ducked to the ground. AP described reporters being told to seek shelter in the press briefing room. Dawn reported that the White House complex went into lockdown and that the lockdown was lifted shortly before 7 p.m. In other words, this was not a minor security scare quietly contained behind the scenes. It unfolded in full view of the press corps, on camera, in real time, at the center of American political power. One of the most dramatic details came from video recorded by journalists already on site. AP and Dawn both referenced footage from reporters who were filming near the White House when the shots rang out. That kind of visual evidence matters in stories like this because it captures the atmosphere in a way official statements never can. The abrupt shift from routine media activity to instant fear, the scramble for cover, the sheer unpredictability of violence, even in a place designed to be nearly impenetrable. Now, who was the suspect? Several outlets identified him as Nasire Best, age 21. AP reported that a law enforcement official, speaking on condition of anonymity, identified the suspect by name. CBS similarly said the deceased suspect was identified as 21-year-old Nasire Best and added that he had previously had contact with law enforcement and the Secret Service. Fox also identified him as a 21-year-old from Maryland. That prior contact is one of the most important parts of this story. AP reported that court records show Best had been arrested in July 2025 after trying to enter a different White House checkpoint without authorization, allegedly ignoring commands to stop, claiming he was Jesus Christ, and saying he wanted to be arrested. AP also reported that a pretrial stay-away order was issued and that a bench warrant later followed over noncompliance. CBS added that Best had previously been arrested near the White House and had been sent to a psychiatric ward for mental health issues. Fox likewise reported prior detentions and mental health concerns. And that changes the conversation significantly. If the suspect had prior run-ins with federal security personnel, if he had a known history of troubling behavior around the White House perimeter, and if there were already legal or mental health concerns in the background, then this story becomes not just about a shooting, but about warning signs. It raises difficult questions. How was this threat profile assessed? What happens after someone displays alarming behavior near the White House? How do authorities balance mental health intervention, legal enforcement, and public safety? And perhaps most importantly, was this latest attack preventable? Those questions are not yet answered, but they are central to understanding the significance of what happened. There is also the question of what exactly the suspect was targeting. Some reports described gunfire toward a Secret Service booth or checkpoint. Fox framed it as shots toward the White House area, while CBS cited sources saying the suspect fired in the direction of a Secret Service booth. Dawn described officers stationed inside a security booth being fired upon. That distinction matters. Was the shooter attempting to attack officers? Was the White House itself the symbolic target? Or was the act primarily directed at breaching or confronting the security perimeter? At this stage, the reporting suggests the checkpoint and officers were the immediate target, but motive and intent are still under investigation. And then there's one of the most troubling details of all: a bystander was shot. Multiple outlets reported that another person, not the suspect, was struck by gunfire during the exchange. But there is still uncertainty over whether that person was hit by the suspect's initial shots or by return fire from officers. CBS said the bystander's condition was serious in early reporting, while later reports said the condition had not been immediately provided. AP explicitly noted that it was unclear whose bullet struck the bystander. This is exactly the kind of ambiguity that becomes critical in the hours after a high-stakes law enforcement shooting. It's also worth noting that some of the details still vary across reports. For example, CBS cited sources saying somewhere between 10 and 20 shots were fired, while other reporting referenced ranges between 15 and 30, and Fox described the suspect as firing roughly 3 shots. CBS also described the weapon as a revolver, while Fox referred to a pistol, and other reports more generally called it a weapon or firearm. That doesn't mean the core story is in doubt. The basic facts are clear. A suspect opened fire near the White House. Secret Service returned fire, the suspect died, and a bystander was hit. But the variations do show why early reporting on fast-moving security incidents should always be treated as provisional until investigators release fuller findings. Now let's step back and ask the bigger question: why does this matter politically and geopolitically? First, timing. According to CBS, Fox, and Dawn, the incident came just as Trump and his team were engaged in intense activity around a possible deal involving Iran. Media crews were already assembled at the White House because of major international developments. So this shooting didn't happen in a vacuum. It erupted at a moment when the White House was already functioning as the nerve center of a sensitive foreign policy and national security storyline. That instantly magnified the symbolic weight of the event. Second, context. AP described this as the third gunfire-related incident near Trump in the past month, referencing prior violence near the White House Correspondents' Dinner and another incident near the Washington Monument earlier in May. That pattern is alarming. Even if each case is separate, the overall message is unmistakable. The security environment around the presidency appears increasingly volatile. Whether driven by political extremism, mental instability, personal obsession, or some combination of these, repeated violent episodes around the president create a climate of constant tension. Third, the incident speaks to something broader in American public life: the normalization of high-threat politics. This is a country where political rallies, campaign events, government buildings, and even press gatherings increasingly operate under the shadow of possible violence. Officials quoted by Fox and CBS condemned political violence and praised the Secret Service response. Those statements are standard, but they also reflect a grim reality. American institutions are now responding to repeated violent episodes not as unimaginable shocks, but as recurring risks. At the same time, this incident could also be interpreted as a demonstration of the system working the way it is designed to work. The suspect did not breach the White House grounds. Secret Service officers reacted immediately. No officers were wounded. The president was protected. The complex was locked down and then reopened. In the narrow operational sense, that is a successful defensive response. The purpose of these security layers is not to guarantee that no threat ever materializes, but to ensure that threats are detected, contained, and neutralized before they reach the president or the building. On that metric, the response appears to have been effective. But a successful response is not the same thing as a reassuring story. Because even if the system stopped the attacker, the public still sees something disturbing. A man with a weapon got close enough to the White House perimeter to trigger a deadly firefight in one of the most secured zones in America. For viewers around the world, that image matters. It projects not only strength in response, but also vulnerability in exposure. In geopolitical terms, perception matters almost as much as reality. Adversaries, allies, and domestic audiences all watch how the United States handles instability at the center of its own government. There is another layer here too: media, symbolism, and spectacle. The White House is not just an office building. It is an image, a symbol, a stage set for American power. Any act of violence nearby automatically becomes more than a crime scene. It becomes a message, whether intended or not. That is why the exact motive of the shooter matters so much. Was this a politically motivated act? Was it driven by delusion or personal fixation? Was the target the presidency, the building, the officers, or simply the idea of state power itself? Right now, authorities have not established a public motive. Until they do, every broader interpretation must remain careful and conditional. The investigation is now likely to focus on several key issues. First, the bystander. What is that person's condition, and whose gunfire caused the injury? Second, the suspect's background. What exactly was known about his previous encounters with the Secret Service and local police? Third, motive. Was there any manifesto, online trail, stated grievance, or evidence of planning? And fourth, security lessons. Were there any procedural or intelligence gaps before the incident, or was this simply the kind of sudden attack that even the best security architecture can only react to, not fully preempt? And here's perhaps the most important takeaway for your audience. This story is not just about one shooter and one evening of chaos. It is about the pressure points of modern American power. It is about how security, politics, media, mental health, and public fear all intersect in one single location. It is about a presidency operating under constant threat. And it is about a country where the line between political theater and political danger feels thinner than ever. So, what should viewers watch next? Watch for official updates from investigators on motive and ballistics. Watch for confirmation on the bystander's injuries. Watch for any indication that the suspect was under active monitoring before the shooting. And watch for whether this incident leads to visible changes in White House perimeter security, media access procedures, or Secret Service posture in the coming days and weeks. Because when gunfire breaks out outside the White House, the story does not end when the lockdown is lifted. In many ways, that is only when the deeper story begins. For now, the immediate facts are clear. A 21-year-old suspect identified as Nasire opened fire near the White House security perimeter. Secret Service officers returned fire and killed him. A bystander was wounded. President Trump was inside the White House, but was not harmed, and federal authorities, including the FBI, are now involved in the investigation. But the larger meaning of this incident, politically, symbolically, and institutionally, is still unfolding. And that is why this is more than breaking news. It is a warning sign, not necessarily of a failed system, but of a system under relentless stress. A reminder that the center of American power remains both fortified and exposed. And a reminder that in today's political climate, even the White House perimeter can become the scene of sudden violence, unanswered questions, and a story that reverberates far beyond Washington.